The roar was the first thing to tear him from the saddle. It was a hungry living sound that clawed at the night, a beast feasting on timber and memory. Clyde Baxter spurred his horse Diablo into a desperate gallop, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs that matched the thunder of hooves on packed earth. The familiar scent of pine and dust was choked out by something acrid and oily a smell that turned his stomach kerosene. Arson. The word was a branding iron against his mind. He crested the last rise, and the world dissolved into a vision from hell. His ranch, the house his father had built with his own hands, the barn they had raised together, beam by beam, was a writhing inferno against the indifferent star-dusted sky. Flames licked at the heavens, spitting embers that danced like malevolent fireflies before dying in the vast, cold dark. The heat struck him like a physical blow, a solid wall that made Diablo rear and snort in terror. Clyde fought the reins, his eyes scanning the maelstrom, searching for a sign of life, for any reason to hope. But there was only the terrible final crackle of a legacy turning to ash. No, the word was a strangled whisper, a prayer to a deaf god. He slid from the saddle, his boots sinking into the parched soil of the land that was supposed to be his forever. The corral fences were gone, the house was a hollowed-out skull with fiery eyes. But it was the barn that held his gaze. The massive structure groaned its spine, breaking under the assault of the fire. That was where she had kept it. His mother, in a small fire-resistant safe tucked away in the tack room. He started running, ignoring the searing heat that blistered his exposed skin. The air was thick with smoke, each breath a mouthful of cinders and sorrow. His father's tools, his grandfather's saddle, the memories of a dozen quiet evenings spent mending leather, all gone. But those were just things. The locket was different. It was the only piece of his mother he had left, a small silver oval with her likeness etched inside a tangible piece of a love he barely remembered. The main doors of the barn had been devoured, leaving a gaping, fiery maw. Without a second thought, Clyde plunged into the chaos. Inside it was a cathedral of destruction. Flaming timbers rained down, and the terrified screams of the few horses trapped in their stalls were a sound he knew would haunt him for the rest of his days. He couldn't save them. He was a fool for even trying to save a piece of metal. But it wasn't metal. It was a promise. It was his anchor to a past that was being systematically erased. He found the tack room, its door already a sheet of flame. He kicked it open, the wood splintering into glowing shards. The heat was unbearable, a physical presence that pressed in on him, stealing the air from his lungs. The small metal safe was on its shelf, its surface glowing a dull, angry red. He wrapped his sleeve around his hand and reached for it, a gasp of pain escaping his lips as the intense heat seared through the thick canvas of his coat. He fumbled with the latch, his fingers clumsy and numb. It was stuck, melted. A deep, groaning crack echoed from above. The main support beam, thick as a man's chest, was surrendering. It sagged, showering him with a cascade of sparks. He had seconds. He pulled his revolver, the cold steel, a strange comfort in the inferno, and fired 3 rounds into the lock mechanism. The metal screamed in protest, but gave way. He wrenched the door open. Empty. The locket was gone. Someone had taken it. The realization hit him harder than the heat, colder than any winter wind. This wasn't just arson. It was a desecration. They hadn't just wanted to destroy his home. They had wanted to steal his soul. The groaning above turned into a deafening shriek of tortured wood. He looked up just as the massive beam gave way. He threw himself backward, a primal scream tearing from his throat, but he wasn't fast enough. The beam crashed down where he had been standing, and a splintered end caught his left forearm, pinning it to the ground. The pain was immediate and blinding, a white-hot agony that shot from his wrist to his shoulder. Fire licked at his sleeve, the smell of burning cloth and his own flesh filling his nostrils. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled desperation, he yanked his arm free. The sound was sickening, a tear of muscle and sinew. He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, cradling his ruined arm, his vision swimming with black spots. He stumbled out of the collapsing barn just as the roof caved in, sending a mushroom cloud of fire and smoke billowing into the night sky. He fell to his knees in the dirt, gasping for air, the silhouette of his burning legacy reflected in his wide, unblinking eyes. The loss was a physical ache in his chest, a hollow space where his past had been. And in that hollow space, something new and terrible began to grow, a cold, hard certainty. This was not the end. This was the beginning of a war. The days that followed were a blur of cheap whiskey and simmering rage. Clyde rode from one dusty town to the next, a ghost haunted by the smell of smoke, his bandaged arm, a constant throbbing reminder of his failure. The burn was a puckered, angry map of his loss, a testament to the day his world had been reduced to embers and stolen memories. He found himself in Tucson, a town that festered under the Arizona sun, where red sand glowed like hot coals and hope was a currency scarcer than water. He pushed through the batwing doors of a saloon that smelled of stale beer sweat and desperation. The place fell quiet as he entered the way places always did, when a stranger with a singular, dangerous purpose walked in. Every eye in the room was on him, wary, suspicious, hostile. He ignored them, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on the bartender, a man with a face like a dried-up creek bed. Clyde's voice was a low rasp, raw from disuse and the dust of the trail. "I'm looking for information." His sentences were short, sharp, like chips of flint. The bartender polished a glass with a dirty rag, his movements slow and deliberate. "Information costs." Clyde slapped a silver dollar on the scarred wood of the bar. It spun, catching the dim light. "I'm looking for the men who burned out the Baxter Ranch. 3 weeks ago. They used kerosene." A flicker of something recognition, perhaps fear, passed through the bartender's eyes before being quickly extinguished. Never heard of it. It was the same answer he'd gotten in every saloon, from every liveryman, from every corner of this godforsaken territory. It was a wall of silence, built from fear or loyalty, and he was tired of running into it. He let the silence hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket. He stared at the bartender, his gaze unwavering, until the man finally looked away, his composure cracking under the weight of Clyde's cold fury. "Some things are best left alone, mister," the bartender muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "Some men cast long shadows." "I'm not afraid of shadows," Clyde said, his voice dangerously quiet. He spent the next 2 days walking the perimeter of his ruined land, the ash crunching under his boots like powdered bone. He was no lawman, no tracker, but his father had taught him to read the land, to notice the things others overlooked. And on the 3rd day, he found it. Tucked away in a small, sheltered wash a 1/4 mile from the barn, where the arsonists had likely tethered their horses. A single clear hoofprint pressed deep into the hardened mud. It was unique, one of the shoes bearing a small V-shaped nick in the outer rim, the mark of a careless farrier or hard ride over rocky terrain. It was a small thing, but it was his, a tangible piece of the men he was hunting. Later that same day, near the charred remains of the bunkhouse, something glinted in the sunlight. He knelt, his fingers carefully brushing away the soot. It was a button. Not a simple wooden toggle from a work shirt, but an ornate silver button etched with the design of a coiled serpent. It was from a gentleman's coat, the kind of finery one didn't wear to a barn burning unless they were careless or arrogant. Or both. He wrapped the button and a detailed sketch of the horseshoe print in an oilcloth and tucked them into his saddlebag. They were more precious to him now than gold. They were the first words in a story he intended to finish, a story that would end with blood and reckoning. He rode out again this time with a purpose that was colder and sharper than grief. He didn't know who they were, but he knew what they rode, and he knew what one of them wore. And in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the West, a man could be found and killed for far less. He found her 10 days later, a black-robed specter in a landscape of bleached bone and shimmering heat. She was kneeling beside a dead horse near a dried-up riverbed, her head bowed as if in prayer. The scene was wrong in a dozen different ways. Her habit was too clean, her hands too soft, and she showed none of the dehydration or sun-scald that should have afflicted anyone stranded for more than a few hours in this merciless terrain. She called herself Sister Rosalie Dean, a name that tasted like a lie on his tongue. He offered her a canteen of water, which she accepted with a polite, rehearsed gratitude that set his teeth on edge. As he helped her build a small fire against the coming chill of the desert night, he noticed the horse. It was a fine-looking bay, even in death. He walked over to it, his eyes scanning the animal with a practiced air, and then he saw it. The right foreshoe. It bore a small V-shaped nick in the outer rim. Ice flooded Clyde's veins. It was the same print, the exact same mark he had found etched in the mud near his burned-out home. He felt the world tilt on its axis. He turned slowly, his hand drifting instinctively toward the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. The woman's Sister Rosalie was watching him, her face a mask of serene piety in the flickering firelight. But her eyes, dark and intelligent, held no serenity at all. They held a spark of calculation, a hidden depth that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He walked back to the fire, his mind racing, trying to piece together the impossible. "A nun out here alone?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual, testing her. "The Apache would have found you by now." She offered a small, placid smile. "The Lord protects his flock." Her voice was smooth as honey, but he detected a faint, almost imperceptible waver. She was a terrible liar. He sat down across from her, the fire crackling between them, and decided to push. "The Lord doesn't leave horseshoe prints like the one I found near my burned-out home," he said, his voice dropping each word, a stone cast into the quiet night. "Same as the one your dead horse was wearing." The mask of piety shattered. For a split second, he saw the woman beneath it, sharp, cornered, and dangerous. The serene smile vanished, replaced by a tense, guarded expression. Her hand, which had been resting on the rosary beads in her lap, tightened. He had her. The shock of the connection, the sheer impossibility of it, gave way to a cold, hard certainty. This woman was no nun, and her presence here was no accident. She recovered quickly, her composure settling back into place like a well-worn coat. But the damage was done. The lie had been exposed. "You are observant, Mr. Baxter," she said, her tone shifting. The soft, prayerful cadence was gone, replaced by something crisp and businesslike. She knew his name. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "You have the advantage of me," he said, his hand still resting on the butt of his pistol. "My name is Rose," she said, ignoring his implied threat. "And you're right. I am not a nun. This," she gestured to the habit, "is a disguise, a necessary one." A disguise for what? She met his gaze directly, and for the first time, he felt the full force of her will. It was like looking into the heart of a forge. "Justice, Mr. Baxter. The same thing you're looking for. I know who burned your ranch. I know why. And I know how to make them pay for it." Clyde's world, already shaken, seemed to stop completely. He had been chasing ghosts, following faint trails that led nowhere. Now a woman with the face of an angel and the eyes of a killer was offering him the answers on a silver platter. It was too easy. A trap. "Why should I believe you?" he demanded. "Because we want the same thing," she said, her voice intense. "And because you have no other choice. You can continue asking questions in saloons until one of their hired guns puts a bullet in your back, or you can listen to me." She leaned forward, the firelight casting dancing shadows across her face. "They are not just arsonists, Clyde. They are an organization protected and powerful. You cannot fight them alone." She wouldn't give him everything, not yet. He could see the caution in her eyes, the way she measured him. "I will give you one name," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. As a show of faith. "Marcus Wade. He runs the water station just outside of Prescott. He supplied the kerosene. Go see him. Ask him about the silver serpent button you found. See what his reaction is. It will be your decision whether to believe me after that." She paused, letting the information sink in. "If you decide to trust me, I will be waiting for you 2 miles north of Wade Station at the Twin Rock Formation. If you don't show up in 2 days, I'll know your answer." She was testing him, forcing him to act on partial information, to take a risk that could very well get him killed. It was a brilliant, dangerous move. Clyde stared at her, this enigma in a stolen habit, and felt a strange and unwelcome pull. She was offering him a path to vengeance, but he had a feeling the price of walking that path with her would be far higher than he could imagine. The ride to Prescott was a torment of dust and doubt. Every instinct screamed that Rose was a trap, a beautiful lure set by the very men he was hunting. Yet her words echoed in his mind, carrying the undeniable ring of truth. She knew about the horseshoe. She knew about the button. She knew his name. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand, and she was the only one offering him a glimpse of the board. Marcus Wade's water station was less a station and more a fortress. A high adobe wall surrounded the property, and the main gate was flanked by 2 men holding repeating rifles with an air of bored menace. This wasn't a place for thirsty travelers. It was a stronghold. The sight of it settled a cold stone of certainty in Clyde's gut. Rose was right. This was bigger than a simple land grab. Clyde left Diablo tied in a cluster of mesquite trees and approached the station on foot, his duster shielding his gun belt from immediate view. He walked with a deliberate, unhurried gait, feigning the look of a trail-weary rancher needing to water his stock. "That's far enough, friend," one of the guards called out, his rifle held loosely but ready. "Just need to water my horse and fill my canteens," Clyde said, his voice calm and even. "Happy to pay." The guards exchanged a look. "Wade ain't seeing anyone today." "I'm not here to see Wade," Clyde lied smoothly. "Just need water. It's a long ride to Flagstaff." The second guard, a hulking man with a scar that split his eyebrow, grunted. "Let him in, Jed. A few dollars is a few dollars." Jed hesitated, then shrugged, unlatching the heavy wooden gate. Clyde stepped through his eyes, scanning everything: the number of men, the location of the stables, the layout of the main house. He counted 6 armed men in the main yard, all of them hard-faced and watchful. He paid for the water, filled his canteens from the large cistern, and then led a non-existent horse toward the stables, claiming it needed a new shoe. He found Marcus Wade in the dim, cool interior of the stable, overseeing the shoeing of a magnificent black stallion. Wade was a man who wore his wealth like armor, a tailored suit of fine wool-polished boots and a silver tie pin. He was immaculate, a stark contrast to the dust and grime of his surroundings. Arrogant, dismissive, and radiating an aura of untouchable power. "Can I help you?" Wade asked, not bothering to look up from the horse. "I was hoping you could," Clyde said, stepping further into the shadows. "I'm looking for the owner of a particular coat." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver serpent button, holding it out on his palm. Wade's head snapped up, his eyes cold and gray as a winter sky fixed on the button. For a fleeting moment, Clyde saw the same flicker of fear he'd seen in the Tucson bartender, but Wade's was quickly replaced by a mask of cold fury. "Where did you get that?" Wade's voice was a low hiss. "Found it," Clyde said conversationally, "near a piece of land that recently had a fire problem. The Baxter Ranch. You ever hear of it?" Wade's hand subtly dropped to the handle of the pearl-gripped revolver at his side. The farrier and two stable hands who had been pretending not to listen now stood up, their hands moving toward their own weapons. The air grew thick with unspoken threats. "You're a long way from home, Mr. Baxter," Wade said, his voice dripping with menace. "And you've been asking too many questions. Samuel Cross doesn't appreciate men who ask too many questions." It was the confirmation he needed. The name Rose had given him. Cross, the man who lit the match. "Tell Cross his carelessness will be the end of him." Clyde said, his own hand now resting on the worn grip of his Colt. Wade chuckled a dry, humorless sound. "I don't think so." He nodded almost imperceptibly to his men. "You see, Mr. Baxter, you won't be leaving this stable." The world exploded into motion. Clyde didn't wait for them to draw. He kicked over a heavy water trough, sending a sloshing wave toward the two stable hands, and dove behind a stack of hay bales as the first shot splintered the wood where he'd been standing. He fired back not to kill, but to suppress. His bullet ricocheted off the anvil, sending the farrier diving for cover. It was a brawl, not a gunfight. One of the stable hands charged him, brandishing a pitchfork. Clyde met the charge, using the man's momentum to twist the weapon from his grasp and slam the handle into his jaw. The other came at him with a hay hook. Clyde sidestepped the vicious swing, brought his pistol down hard on the man's wrist, and delivered a punishing right cross that sent him staggering back into a stall. He heard the sound of running feet from the yard reinforcements. He was out of time. Wade was crouched behind a feed bin, firing wildly. Clyde knew he couldn't win a prolonged fight. He needed to escape. He saw his chance, a high window at the back of the stable leading out toward the open desert. He fired 2 more shots in Wade's direction to keep his head down, then sprinted for the far wall. He kicked a barrel into place, scrambled onto it, and threw himself through the window, rolling as he hit the ground outside. Gunshots erupted behind him, chewing up the dirt at his heels. He ran zigzagging through the scrub brush, his lungs burning. He was outmatched, outgunned, and a fool for walking in there alone. But he was alive, and he had his confirmation. Rose was telling the truth, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he needed her. 2 miles north, the Twin Rock Formation stood like silent sentinels against the setting sun. Rose was there, just as she'd promised her black mare, grazing peacefully nearby. She was no longer wearing the habit. She was dressed in practical buckskins, a gun belt strapped to her narrow hips, looking more like a scout than a runaway heiress. She showed no surprise when he rode up, only a cool, appraising look. "You're late," she said, her voice calm. "I ran into some trouble," Clyde said, dismounting. He was covered in dust and bleeding from a shallow cut on his cheek where a splinter of wood had caught him. "I can see that," she replied, her eyes missing nothing. "Did you get what you went for?" Wade confirmed it. He mentioned a name, Samuel Cross. A shadow passed over Rose's features at the mention of the name. "Then you believe me?" It wasn't a question. "I believe you know who they are," Clyde corrected. "That doesn't mean I trust you." She gave a small, wry smile. Trust is earned, Mr. Baxter. We'll work on that. She turned her attention to the horizon, her expression growing serious. Wade will have sent word to his partners by now. The second name on your list is Thomas Kellerman. He's the banker who financed the entire operation, and he's much more careful than Wade. To get to him, we'll need more than guns. We'll need a plan. She mounted her horse with a fluid grace. Kellerman is hosting a gala for the territorial governor in Prescott in 3 days. He's a man who enjoys flaunting his success. It's the perfect opportunity to get inside his office and find the ledgers that will prove his connection to the land grabs. Clyde looked at her, then at his own trail-worn clothes and the grime under his fingernails. And how do you propose we get into a governor's gala? Rose's smile returned this time with a dangerous predatory glint. Oh, that's the easy part. You, Mr. Baxter, will be my hired bodyguard. And I? She paused, a spark of pure mischief in her eyes. Will be a wealthy widow from San Francisco looking to make a significant investment in this promising territory. The journey to Prescott became a crucible for their burgeoning alliance. They rode under the vast, unblinking eye of the sun, and the silence between them filled with unspoken questions. During the long days in the saddle, and later around the crackling warmth of their campfires, the walls between them began to crumble brick by cautious brick. Rose, sensing his lingering distrust, began to share pieces of her past, not as a confession, but as a strategic disclosure of assets. My father was a stubborn man, she said one night, staring into the flames. He believed in the law, truly believed in it. He was a federal judge, you see. When he started investigating rumors of organized land fraud in the territory, his colleagues in Washington told him to let it go. They said it was a local matter, but he wouldn't. Her voice was quiet, laced with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He taught me how to shoot, how to track, how to see the patterns others miss. He wanted me to be able to protect myself. He never imagined I'd have to use those skills to avenge him. She revealed her time with the Pinkerton Agency was a rebellion, a way to use her father's lessons in a world he wouldn't have approved of. She spoke of her disillusionment of seeing how easily justice could be bought and sold, how the law was a shield for the powerful and a cage for the weak. Her relationship with Samuel Cross, she explained, had been an arrangement brokered by their families, a merger of influence and wealth. She'd seen it as a duty until she discovered the blood on his hands was her own father's. Clyde, in turn, found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He spoke of his mother, a woman he barely remembered, but whose silver locket was the icon of his childhood. He talked about his father, a man of quiet strength, who believed that a man's worth was measured by the sweat on his brow and the honesty of his handshake. He described the ranch not as a piece of property, but as a living thing, a testament to his family's dream. As he spoke, he realized he wasn't just fighting for vengeance anymore. He was fighting for the memory of a simpler, better world that men like Cross and Kellerman were systematically destroying. They arrived in Prescott a day before the gala, a bustling town teeming with miners, merchants, and politicians. It was a world away from the dusty isolation Clyde was used to. Rose, however, moved through it with an effortless confidence. She used a fraction of the money she had taken when she fled her old life to secure them rooms in the finest hotel and to purchase their disguises. When Clyde saw her in her gown, he felt the air leave his lungs. It was a dress of deep emerald silk that shimmered in the gaslight, cut in a way that was both elegant and daring. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate coif, adorned with a single diamond pin. She was no longer Rose the fugitive, or Sister Rosalie the liar. She was a vision of wealth and power, utterly convincing and breathtakingly beautiful. "You clean up well, Mr. Baxter?" She said, her eyes appraising his own transformation. He was dressed in a black frock coat, his worn gun belt replaced by a discreet shoulder holster hidden beneath the jacket. He felt like a fraud, a wolf in sheep's clothing. "Let's just get this over with," he grumbled, uncomfortable under her intense gaze. "Patience," she chided softly, adjusting his cravat, with a touch that sent an unwelcome jolt through him. "Tonight, we are not ourselves. I am Mrs. Eleanor Vance, and you are my loyal protector, Mr. Graves. We are here to be seen, to be noticed, and most importantly, to be underestimated." The gala was a glittering affair held in Kellerman's opulent mansion. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and expensive cigars, the sound of laughter and a string quartet mingling under crystal chandeliers. Thomas Kellerman was everything Clyde despised, portly, sweating in his fine suit, with a practiced smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He greeted Rose, or rather Mrs. Vance, with a fawning deference, his gaze lingering on the diamond pin in her hair. Rose played her part to perfection. She was charming, witty, and dropped just enough hints about her vast, imagined fortune to make Kellerman practically drool. Clyde stood a few paces behind her, a silent, imposing shadow, his eyes constantly scanning the room, noting the guards, the exits, the location of Kellerman's private study on the second floor. While Rose kept the banker enthralled with talk of railroads and mining investments, Clyde slipped away. He moved through the crowded halls with a quiet efficiency, a ghost at the feast. He found the study unlocked, just as Rose had predicted. Kellerman was too arrogant to believe anyone would dare to cross him in his own home. The office was a shrine to greed. The walls were lined with mahogany bookshelves, a massive oak desk dominated the room, and a thick Persian rug muffled his footsteps. He went straight to the desk, his fingers expertly working the lock on the top drawer. Inside, he found what they were looking for, ledgers meticulously kept detailing every transaction, every forced sale, every piece of land acquired through unfortunate accidents. He was about to gather them when he saw another smaller file tucked away at the back. It was labeled simply, Baxter. His breath caught in his throat. He opened it. Inside were the forged deeds to his land survey maps and a single folded note. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The message was short, written in a sharp, aggressive script. "Handle this one personally. I want it erased. All of it." Snarr. Erased. The word was so cold, so final. This wasn't business. This was personal. But why? What had his father ever done to warrant such a deep, annihilating hatred? He tucked the note in the most incriminating ledgers inside his coat. As he was closing the drawer, his fingers brushed against something hidden beneath a false bottom. He pried it open. Inside was a small, leather-bound folio. He opened it, and his world came to a halt. It was an old photograph, faded and creased with age. A young woman stood between two men, her hand resting on the arm of one, her smile aimed at the other. Clyde recognized one of the men instantly. It was his father, younger, happier, his eyes filled with a light Clyde hadn't seen since he was a boy. The woman was beautiful with dark, sad eyes. And the other man? The other man was a younger, angrier version of the face he'd seen on wanted posters and in his nightmares. Samuel Cross. His mind reeled. What was his father doing in a photograph with the man who had ordered his legacy destroyed? Tucked behind the photograph was a letter, the paper brittle, and the ink faded to a pale brown. It was addressed to his father, John Baxter. The handwriting was delicate, feminine. It was from the woman in the photograph. "My dearest John," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be married. It is a practical match, a union of convenience that will provide the security my family demands, and that you, my love, cannot. Please do not think this decision was made with a light heart. Every part of me longs to run away with you to build the life we dreamed of under the wide open sky. But I cannot, for I have a secret. I can no longer keep a truth that would destroy us both if it were known. Clyde's heart hammered against his ribs as he read the final devastating lines. The child I carry is yours, but he will be raised with another man's name. For his safety and for yours, you must never seek him out. You must forget me. Forget us. His name will be Samuel. May God forgive me for what I have done. Yours always, Eleonora. Samuel. Samuel Cross. The ledgers fell from Clyde's numb fingers, scattering across the floor. The roar of the fire, the smell of kerosene, the image of his burning home. It all crashed down on him, recontextualized by this single, terrible truth. Samuel Cross wasn't just a rival. He wasn't just a greedy land baron. He was his brother. His vendetta wasn't about land or money. It was about a lifetime of bitterness, of being the secret, the shame, the son raised by another man, while his true father built a life with a legitimate family. He hadn't just burned a ranch. He had tried to burn away the evidence of a life he felt had been stolen from him. The fight for justice had just become a tragic family drama, and Clyde was standing at its bloody broken heart. The world outside Kellerman's study, the music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, faded to a dull, distant roar. Clyde stood frozen, and the letter clutched in his hand, a fragile testament to a betrayal that had shaped 2 lives and was now threatening to end them. He heard footsteps in the hall and shoved the letter and photograph into his pocket, his mind a maelstrom of shock, anger, and a profound, aching sorrow. It was Rose. She slipped into the room, her eyes bright with urgency. "Did you find them?" she whispered, gesturing to the scattered ledgers. He could only knot his throat too tight to form words. He looked at her, at this woman who had become his partner in a quest for revenge, and realized the nature of that quest had irrevocably changed. He wasn't just hunting a villain anymore. He was hunting his own blood. "What is it?" she asked, sensing his distress. "Clyde, what did you find?" Before he could answer, the doors to the study burst open. Thomas Kellerman stood there, his face purple with rage. Behind him were 4 of his guards, their guns drawn. "It seems we have rats in our house," the banker sneered, "and a very foolish widow." The news of their infiltration must have traveled faster than a telegraph signal. An informant at the party, a suspicious guard, it didn't matter. Cross's network was everywhere. He had been toying with them, letting them walk right into his trap. "The jig is up," Baxter Kellerman gloated. "Cross sends his regards. He was very disappointed in you. He'd hoped you were smarter." Retaliation was swift and brutal. While Clyde and Rose managed to fight their way out of the mansion, using the ensuing chaos as cover, the true nature of Cross's plan became terrifyingly clear. He didn't just want them dead. He wanted them destroyed and their names dragged through the mud until they had nowhere left to run. By the next morning, Clyde's face was on a federal warrant. A stagecoach carrying a payroll from Kellerman's bank had been robbed the night of the gala. The 2 guards had been shot and killed. According to a sworn affidavit from a reliable witness, the man who led the robbery was Clyde Baxter. He was no longer a victim seeking justice. He was a wanted murderer, a federal fugitive with a price on his head. Cross's attack on Rose was just as insidious. He didn't frame her for a crime. Instead, he used his connections in Washington to leak her true identity. Within a day, every lawman and bounty hunter in the territory knew that the beautiful Mrs. Vance was in fact Rose Delqua, a rogue Pinkerton agent wanted for stealing federal evidence and deserting her post. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. They were forced to flee Prescott, riding hard through the night, the weight of their new status pressing down on them. Every stranger was a potential threat, every distant rider a possible posse. The open country that had once represented freedom now felt like a vast, exposed trap. "He's playing a different game now," Rose said, her voice tight with anger, as they made a cold camp in a secluded canyon. "This isn't about silencing us. It's about tormenting us. He wants us to feel what it's like to have everything stripped away." It was in that canyon, huddled by a smokeless fire, that Clyde finally showed her the letter. He watched her face as she read it, saw her eyes widen in shock, and then soften with a deep, unexpected compassion. "My God, Clyde," she whispered, handing the fragile paper back to him as if it might crumble to dust. "I'm so sorry." "He hates me," Clyde said, the words tasting like ash. "He hates me for being born." "He hates what you represent," Rose corrected gently. "A life, a name, a father he never had. It doesn't justify what he's done, but it explains the cruelty of it. The burning of the ranch, the theft of the locket. He wasn't just destroying a property. He was trying to erase a history he was never a part of." Their mission was now impossibly complicated. For Rose, the objective remained clear: stop Cross and his criminal empire. But for Clyde, it had become a terrible personal reckoning. How could he seek justice against his own brother, even a brother who had tried to kill him? Their salvation came from an unexpected quarter. As they hid out, their supplies dwindling, they were found not by bounty hunters, but by a grizzled old rancher named Jedediah Stone. His ranch had been one of the first to fall to Cross's schemes. He had lost everything, but he hadn't broken. He, along with a dozen other families ruined by Kellerman's predatory loans and Wade's water monopoly, had formed a quiet underground network. They were waiting, hoping for a chance to fight back. "We heard what you did at Wade's place." Jedediah set his eyes sharp and assessing. "And we heard how Kellerman and Cross turned the law against you. We know you're not criminals. You're the only hope we've got." Jedediah and his network gave them shelter, food, and information. They became their eyes and ears, a small but determined army of the dispossessed. They learned the layout of Cross's estate, his routines, the delivery schedules of his supplies. They were no longer just two fugitives against an empire. They were the leaders of a rebellion fueled by the collective grief and anger of everyone Cross had wronged. And as they planned their final gambit, the sky began to gather dark, angry clouds, as if the heavens themselves were preparing for the coming storm. The storm broke the night they chose to attack, a furious squall that lashed the territory with curtains of rain and cannonades of thunder. It was the perfect cover. Cross's estate was a sprawling hacienda perched on a mesa, a monument to stolen wealth, its windows glowing like malevolent eyes in the tempest. Guided by Jedediah's hand-drawn maps, Clyde and Rose, along with a handful of the most trusted ranchers, moved through the deluge like wraiths. Their objective was twofold: secure the evidence that would exonerate them and destroy Cross's operation, and for Clyde to confront the brother he never knew he had. Rose had used the network to send a message, a carefully worded tip to a U.S. Marshal in Phoenix she knew to be honorable, a man her father had once mentored. She told him that the evidence needed to break the territory's largest criminal ring could be found at the Cross estate, and that the fugitive Clyde Baxter might be there attempting to clear his name. The marshal and his deputies were due to arrive by dawn. It was their ticking clock. The infiltration was a silent, brutal affair. The storm masked their approach, the lightning flashes illuminating their path in brief, stark tableaus. They dispatched the outer sentries quietly, men whose loyalty was to a paycheck, not a cause. As the ranchers moved to secure the stables and cut the telegraph lines, Clyde and Rose slipped into the main house through a service entrance. They found Samuel Cross in his study, the same room where he had likely penned the order to burn the Baxter ranch. He was standing by a large window, a glass of brandy in his hand, watching the storm. He didn't seem surprised to see them. He turned, and for the first time, Clyde faced his half-brother. The resemblance to his father was undeniable. The same strong jaw, the same dark hair. But where his father's eyes had held warmth, Cross's were chips of ice filled with a lifetime of resentment. Brother Cross said the word a poison dart. I was wondering when you'd finally arrive. Did you enjoy the party? And Prescott Kellerman told me you made quite an impression. It's over, Samuel Clyde said, his voice steady, despite the storm raging both outside and within him. He held his Colt, but it was pointed at the floor. This was not how he wanted this to end. Cross laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Over. It was over before you were born, little brother. It was over the day our father chose his respectable wife over my mother. The day he chose you. He gestured around the opulent room. Everything I have, I built myself. I clawed my way up from nothing while you were handed a legacy on a silver platter. A legacy you didn't deserve. He walked to his desk and picked up a small bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. His mother's letters. She wrote to him, you know, for years, begging. He never answered. He erased us. So I decided to return the favor. The air crackled with tension. This was it, the culmination of decades of pain and jealousy. A battle of words and wills, a confrontation between two sides of the same bloodline. Walk away, brother, Cross offered, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I will let you live. Disappear. Let the world think you died a fugitive. It's more than our father ever gave me. Or stay and die for the memory of a man who was never the saint you imagined. Before Clyde could respond, a side door to the study creaked open. Thomas Kellerman stepped through, a smug grin on his face, flanked by two of his own hired guns. He held a pistol aimed squarely at Cross. An inspiring family reunion, the banker said, his voice oozing betrayal, but I'm afraid I find the ending rather dull. Cross's face contorted in a mask of fury. Kellerman, what is the meaning of this? The meaning, Samuel, is that you've become a liability. Your personal vendetta has drawn too much attention. Federal marshals, Pinkerton agents. It's bad for business, Kellerman explained with chilling calm. I've decided to dissolve our partnership. I'll kill you both, claim I was defending my property from the notorious Baxter gang, and inherit the entire empire. It's a much cleaner narrative. Suddenly, the main doors of the study flew open. Marcus Wade stood there with more men trapping them. Rose, who had been circling the room, was grabbed from behind, a knife pressed to her throat. The situation had spiraled out of control. Kellerman's grin widened. It seems your lover is in a predicament, Baxter. A classic dilemma. Clyde's world narrowed to the sight of Rose, her eyes wide but defiant, the glint of steel at her neck. The rage he felt was pure and absolute. His personal anguish over his brother, his quest for justice, it all evaporated. All that mattered was her. He looked at Cross, and in his half-brother's eyes he saw not hatred, but a flicker of the same trapped fury. They had both been played. Kellerman had been planning this all along, using Cross's obsession and Clyde's quest for vengeance to eliminate all his rivals in one fell swoop. Clyde had to make a choice, his vengeance against Cross or the life of the woman he loved. But it wasn't a choice at all. Let her go, Kellerman, Clyde said, his voice dangerously low. I don't think so, the banker chuckled. It was then that Samuel Cross made his move. In a final, unexpected act of familial connection, he let out a roar of pure rage and threw his heavy glass of brandy directly at Kellerman's face. The banker recoiled momentarily blinded, and in that split second of chaos, Cross lunged not at Clyde, but at Kellerman's gunman. It was the diversion Clyde needed. He fired his shot, taking the man holding Rose in the shoulder. She broke free, drawing her own weapon. The study erupted in a cacophony of gunfire. Clyde moved his focus entirely on Kellerman, who was now scrambling for cover. He saw Cross go down, clutching his chest, a look of grim satisfaction on his face, as one of Kellerman's men shot him before being cut down by Rose. Clyde cornered Kellerman behind the massive desk. The banker's face was a mask of terror, his arrogance stripped away, to reveal the coward beneath. "Please," he whimpered, "we can make a deal." "The time for deals is over," Clyde said, his voice cold as the grave. The gunshot that followed was drowned out by a final deafening clap of thunder. The storm outside began to subside as quickly as it had begun, its fury spent. The study was a wreck of shattered glass, splintered wood, and suffocating silence punctuated only by the ragged sound of their breathing. Kellerman and his men were dead. Wade, seeing how the tide had turned, had surrendered to Jedediah's ranchers outside. It was over. Clyde rushed to his brother's side. Samuel was lying on the Persian rug, a dark stain spreading across the front of his fine white shirt. His breathing was shallow, his eyes already glazing over. Clyde knelt beside him, and the complex storm of his own emotions, anger, pity, regret, leaving him speechless. Foolish Cross rasped a bloody smile, touching his lips. He should have known. Never to corner a snake. His gaze found Clyde's, and for a moment the lifetime of bitterness seemed to fade, replaced by a flicker of something else, something akin to understanding. He gave this to her, he whispered, his trembling hand pressing a small object into Clyde's palm. It was a small wooden bird, intricately carved from a piece of pine, worn smooth with time. It was the kind of thing a man might whittle by a campfire, a simple token of affection. A gift from their father to the woman he loved but abandoned. It was the only piece of his father Samuel had ever owned. She kept it. Cross choked out his last words. Always. His eyes drifted shut, and with a final shuddering breath, Samuel Cross was gone. Clyde knelt there, the wooden bird in his hand, a profound and tragic silence settling over the room. He had won. He had gotten his justice, but it felt like ashes in his mouth. Just as the first rays of dawn pierced the storm clouds, the U.S. Marshal and his deputies arrived. They found a scene of carnage, but also one of clarity. Rose, her composure restored, presented the Marshal with Kellerman's ledgers, Cross's deathbed confession as witnessed by Clyde, and the sworn testimonies of Jedediah and the other ranchers. The conspiracy was laid bare, the truth undeniable. The federal warrants for Clyde and Rose were rescinded, and the full weight of the law came down on what was left of the organization, starting with the arrest of Marcus Wade. Months later, the Arizona sun shone down on a land reborn. Clyde stood on the porch of his new ranch house, a larger, stronger structure built on the foundations of the old. The air smelled of fresh-cut lumber pine and the rich promise of turned earth. The land was thriving, the fields green, the corrals full. He had offered jobs and homes to Jedediah and the other families ruined by Cross. And together, they were building something new, something better from the ruins of the past. Rose came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. She was no longer a fugitive. Armed with the evidence they had collected and her formidable powers of persuasion, she had struck a deal. A conditional pardon in exchange for her expertise. She now wore a tin star on her vest, a U.S. Marshal tasked with rooting out the last vestiges of corruption in the territory, and ensuring that what happened to the Baxter Ranch would never happen again. Theirs was not a simple happily ever after. They were two scarred people who had walked through fire and found a new purpose on the other side. "It's beautiful," she said softly, her gaze sweeping over the valley. "We built it," he replied, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. Together. That evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and violet, Clyde walked over to the new stone fireplace that was the heart of their home. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. It had been found in Kellerman's safe, a trophy cross had kept. He opened it, looking at the tiny, smiling portrait of his mother one last time, before placing it carefully on the center of the mantelpiece. Then he took out the small carved wooden bird. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of his complex history settling on his shoulders. He was not erasing the painful parts of his past, not anymore. He was acknowledging all of it, the love, the loss, the betrayal, the sacrifice. With a deep breath, he placed the wooden bird right next to the silver locket. Two disparate pieces of a fractured family finally brought together in a house built on justice and a future built on hope.